Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Let's see. Can you go to the slide before that one, Cindy, please? There we go. Cool. All right, great. Well, thank you all for your patience. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, I know it's really nice weather outside. I'm actually in California, but I know it's nice weather in Ann Arbor as well. So thanks for being here. Hopefully you all get a chance to step out and see the sun, enjoy that. But yeah, this workshop will be applying to research opportunities, the nitty gritty and what not to do. So we're basically just going to be giving you all advice on applying to research opportunities. And then you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Cindy. Oh, sorry, my bad. Okay, so sorry, I have like the slides on my side too, and I was just looking at mine. I was like, why isn't it changing? Okay, great. So we are going to, if this is, sorry, yeah, if this is your like first Star Scholars workshop, or if you haven't completed one of these pre-surveys yet, please feel free to go to the link that I just dropped in the chat, and then that'll just ask you some questions, get some information from you. Yeah, so that's right there. Just a really quick survey. Great. And then if you didn't get a chance to come to our last workshop, we actually have it up on YouTube. So you can just type in the link that's on the screen, or if you also just go to Psych SAA YouTube, there's last week's session. And then I believe there's other videos as well, just with more information. So it's definitely a good resource to have if you're not able to make it to one of the workshops, or if you just want to kind of review some of the information that you might have gotten from one of the workshops. Great. So just as an update for those of you who are a part of the University of Michigan and did apply to the Star Scholars Program, thank you all for applying. The deadline for the applications has now closed. We'll be in the process of going through the applications, and you all should hear back by mid-December. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Great. So today, again, we're basically talking about how to get involved with research in your specific area, and also kind of across the university or whatever university you may be at. So different research opportunities in different areas, as well as sharing what we have here at the University of Michigan and other broader research opportunities we're aware of. We'll also talk about different types of research assistant positions. So there's like a couple different ways those can work. And then we'll also walk you all through the typical process for getting a position. So from applying to speaking with the person you would be a research assistant for, different things like that. And we'll also share some additional tips on just boosting your, what would you say, like competitiveness as an applicant. So yeah, just trying to make sure you all have the best possible shot at obtaining that position that you might be interested in applying to. Great. So we'll just give some brief intros. The slide after this talks a little bit about our kind of journeys to the PhD programs that we're in currently. But yeah, I guess I'll just start off. So my name is Eric. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in psychology and women's and gender studies. Broadly, I study masculinity in various forms of media, so like social media, TV, film, different things like that, music. And then maybe Lindsay, if you want to introduce yourself, and then Jessica.
Yeah, hi, my name's Lindsay. I am a third-year PhD candidate in the clinical science program, and my research broadly relates to whether people can become addicted to highly processed foods, so foods like pizza, cake, candies, and whether that functions like a traditional substance use disorder.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. I'm a second year also in the clinical science PhD program. My research is specifically on early life adversity, how it influences brain development, and also neural correlates and contextual factors that promote resilience in youth.
Awesome, thanks. Cool, so I'll go ahead and start off by sharing my journey. Dang, I don't know if the slides got messed up. Only Lindsay's is showing. Okay, cool. There we go. It's just like the effects. Or I guess, yeah, maybe you can start off then,
Yeah, it looks like
since
Lindsay's
there
first and then
Yeah,
you're second. Sorry.
cool. No, that's cool.
Sure, yeah. I can go first. So my journey was a little bit different than some other people. I went to a very small undergraduate college that had about 800 students that didn't really have research labs initially. So my journey started with an independent undergraduate internship at the Mayo Clinic that I pursued on my own through reaching out to see if anybody would take a volunteer research assistant. I got a lot of research experience through my senior honors thesis that I did with the department. I ended up taking a few gap years between undergraduate and grad school where I tried out some more applied type of experiences, like working as a community crisis screener, working on an inpatient unit to get a feel for clinical work, and then realized I needed some more research experience to be able to pursue my goal of going into a PhD program. So I pursued more volunteer opportunities in the community before moving to Michigan and becoming a lab manager for a couple of years before applying to PhD programs here at U of M. So several year journey. And yeah.
Great. So I actually forgot to edit these slides for my journey, but I'll kind of just give it to you all verbally. So I also went to a university that wasn't necessarily small, but it wasn't research focused. So it's a state university in California, which is where I was born and raised. And I actually, I think, found out about research maybe in like my sophomore year of college, just because I had talked to a TA and he had let me know about it. So some of the beginning things were kind of happenstance. Like the first research experience I had was with a professor I actually met while I was working at Wells Fargo. So I used to be a bank teller. This person used to come in for quarters all the time, and we just like, I don't know, I guess we just hit it off one day, and he was like, oh yeah, like I do research on like music and this and that. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, can I be a part of your lab? And yeah, so that kind of happened. But in addition to that, so that was my first research experience, but I was also a part of a lot of programs that are geared towards helping underrepresented students get involved in research and then get into graduate school. So in some ways similar to the STAR program, but yeah, after I had that first research experience, I got into this program called McNair, and then kind of conducted my own independent research under a mentor as part of the program. And then from there, I kind of, yeah, branched off and started doing like other types of research. But again, since I wasn't at a research intensive university, it was kind of limited on what I could do research in. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but there are a lot of transferable skills you can gain from being in any type of research lab. So you don't have to worry too much about if it doesn't directly align with your interests or what you want to do in grad school. But yeah, I pretty much had that experience, had some other experiences through these research programs that I was a part of. And then another big one that I had was a summer research program at the University of Michigan. So I want to say it was like an 8 to 10 week program where I was able to go to the University of Michigan. They like housed me, and I was able to work with a faculty member. And there's also a bunch of different types of like professional development. And I was able to kind of network with a lot of people at Michigan as well, like build relationships with faculty and grad students. Yeah, so from there, I think that helped me really build the relationships necessary to, I guess, be a little more competitive in the application process to Michigan. But yeah, again, I'm in the Joint Psychology and Women's and Gender Studies program. So for that, I did my best to talk to people in both areas since it's so intertwined. But yeah, that's my story.
Great. And so kind of like Lindsay, my college was also pretty small for undergrad. We did have some labs there. And so I did start out with research as a sophomore in undergrad. It was a neuroscience lab, and I was really excited about just like getting involved in research. And I decided that I wanted to try for a summer internship the summer after my sophomore year. So I actually also ended up at Michigan for a summer. I did a 10-week program here, also in a neuro lab. And I was, enthusiastic about it, but starting to realize that I wanted to do more clinical work. So I applied again to internships for my junior year. And that internship was very similar, another 10-week program where I worked at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And so in that lab, I was working with adult populations, studying cocaine use disorder and the brain still, but in a clinical population. And then after that, I graduated, and I also wanted to get some more research experience before applying to grad school. So I spent 2 years at the National Institute of Mental Health. While there, I got to work with children and families experiencing anxiety and work on a treatment protocol. And after that, I applied for grad school and ended up here at U of M's PhD clinical program.
Cool. So ironically, between us, or I guess, let's see. Yeah, Jessica and Lindsay kind of sounded like they had similar experiences just based on the colleges that they went to. And then, I mean, mine wasn't super different, but that's not necessarily representative of like everybody that goes into PhD programs. There's a lot of people that take gaps in between. There's some people that, at least so at the state school that I was at, it's actually uncommon at non-research one universities to like get involved super early on in research. A lot of people will find out like their junior or their senior year and then kind of stress out like, oh shoot, like now I have to try and catch up because grad apps are like this next cycle. And so there's a lot of different ways that people go about getting into PhD programs. It's not always like a linear process. Yeah, some people will do master's programs in between. So yeah, all that to say that yeah, if your goal is to get into a PhD program or a master's program or whatever it may be, there's always different ways to go about getting there. And again, it's not always like a 1, 2, 3, 4 step. Sometimes it's like 1 to 7 to 12, back to 3. Yeah, so it can look a lot of different ways. Yeah, with different levels of difficulty and obstacles. So I mean, we have school and then research, but then there's also personal life and other things that everyone kind of handles differently and that everyone experiences. Cool. So now we'll go ahead and jump into how to find research opportunities. And again, we'll talk about a variety of different research opportunities, kind of what they look like and where you can look for them. All right. So in terms of where research is performed, we have, as you all might imagine, academic institutions. So for those of you who are at the University of Michigan, Michigan does a lot of different research. There's a lot of areas to get involved. And then even if your institute is a non-research one institute, there typically is still research being done there. Let's see. Yeah, but again, so for your academic institution, the psychology department is a great place to start off. Usually they'll have like a website or something like that you can check out that lists the research everyone is doing. But psychology is not the only area that you all can do research in. Again, when I first started, actually, I don't think I mentioned this, but when I first started research or when I heard about it, I was like, oh, okay, like white lab coats and beakers and like mixing things. And that's not what my psych research is at all. Like I kind of just thought research had to do with like, I don't know, like bioscientists and stuff and chemistry. But there's a lot of different types of research and it really spans across all disciplines. So in the social sciences, you have things like social work, American culture, political science, and professional schools. Sometimes there is work that's more focused on like policy change. And then clinical sciences, there's some stuff that focuses on like one-on-one counseling. There's stuff that focuses on like different techniques for counseling. And there's also private and public institutions. So sometimes there's nonprofits that conduct research as well as think tanks and government agencies. So, I mean, everyone has had to deal with COVID. I mean, yeah, we're like writing this pandemic out. I don't know, we're on like year 3 or year 4. So, I mean, I think this is one of the examples of like public facing research. So people know what's going on. Like as the vaccine started rolling out or as we were waiting for them to roll out, like you had these big government agencies, yeah, I mean, like the CDC, but a lot of other people doing research and collaborating together. yeah, so I mean, that's kind of just an example of some agencies that are doing the research and they're responsible for communicating that out to the public. Um, but yeah, in addition to the places where research is conducted, there's also, I guess, sorry, actually, for where the research is conducted, as opposed to like the institution itself, there's like lab settings for animal research, cognitive science. There, yeah, like so when I started research, it was really just a room with like 4 computers, and I was like, oh, okay, like there's no beakers here, like I don't have to wear a lab coat or anything. So what a research lab looks like varies pretty significantly based on the type of research you're doing. So yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have like animals hanging out on like computer chairs and stuff like that. Usually it would be a more like regulated setting if you're doing that type of work. And then there's also applied settings. So some people do research at like high schools, elementary schools, even universities. Then there's community orgs. So if you're doing partnerships with specific community programs, yeah, there's like community centers that you'll work at. There's also hospitals, prisons. So research is very wide spanning, can be done in a variety of different settings. Great. So then in terms of positions that are available, so one option you'll have here at the University of Michigan and like at a lot of other universities are doing it for credit. So some programs require that you have some sort of research experience or internship, so that'll count towards like your degree attainment. And even if it's not a requirement, I'm pretty sure it's offered at most universities. And another option is as part of the work study program. So that would be kind of so I guess I'm trying to think of how I'd explain that. So
So basically it's paid, but it's easier for the PI for your lab to do that because it also works with your financial aid package.
There we go.
So
okay, cool.
basically they pay you make one rate, but what the lab that you are working with has to pay out of their budget is a lot less because it gets paid out of grant money.
Definitely. Great, thank you for that. Yeah, and then there's also the option of stipend or hourly pay. So as opposed to that work study situation where part of it would be in conjunction with your financial aid, stipends can be paid out by programs directly. So if you join a program that helps out with research, or that helps you find a research opportunity, sometimes they can pay you like a monthly stipend or a semesterly stipend. And then the labs themselves and those PIs can also pay you hourly based on the money that they have available. Yeah, and then in addition to that, there's like formal internship programs that you can do. So Jessica and I both mentioned doing summer research programs. I'm not sure, did you do SROP as well, Jessica, or was it a different program?
I did not. I did like it was called like an REU, like a research experience for graduates, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's various, like internships or summer research programs. And yeah, I mean, you can get paid for those as well. Some of them are volunteer. So when I started research, all my things were like volunteer. I was kind of just working to get experience and wasn't getting paid for it. Sometimes that's how it has to happen. If you're lucky, and in the ideal world, you'll jump into research and immediately start getting paid. But yeah, I definitely did a lot of, I don't know, like free work, but yeah, volunteer work essentially. And sometimes that'll give you a more competitive edge when you're applying to paid positions. So like, oh, hey, like you already have experience. So it gives you a little more room to, I guess, maybe not even more, it gives you more to offer different labs that you might be applying to or internships and so forth. Great. And then in terms of University of Michigan specific opportunities, so there's the undergraduate research opportunity program, which is offered to undergraduates here at the institution, wherein, yeah, and then Cindy just dropped a link that you all can check out that gives some more specific information on UROP. Yeah, and then all the links for the programs here. But essentially, these are all offered at the University. Oh, sorry. Were you going to say something, Sydney?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to drop in the links for the ones that are available here at Michigan. And then it sounds like you're already on the road to let them know which ones are available to students outside of Michigan versus not.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so definitely check out those links, but as kind of like a brief explanation. So for UROP, an independent study that can typically occur during the fall or the winter semester, you apply to the program, and then I believe there's like a number of faculty that work with UROP, and you can be mentored by a faculty member, conduct research with them, and then I believe there's like a culminating, not necessarily like a conference, but there's like a presentation that you give on your research, right, Cindy?
Yeah, so there's a poster session. Europe you can do either for credit, or if you have financial aid, you can do it for work study money. And typically that's, you'll spend a lot of your hours working in a lab. And then there's also, they have sort of Europe-wide programming on professional development issues.
Definitely. And then undergraduate, independent research or studies also kind of follow that similar line of options that we talked about. So they could be for work study, they could be volunteering, also for credit. So I think if you're doing it for credit, then you would just sign up for the course, and then the person that you'd be working with would kind of sign off on it, that you're doing independent research with them. But you could also do that like separate from, and I mean, this would be applicable to everyone. Like you can engage in independent research without necessarily any like formal documentation. Like you kind of just help out the PI and then build that relationship with them in that way. The program that I did was the Summer Research Opportunity Program, which is SROP. And this is typically for students that don't go to the University of Michigan. So people apply from all over the country. Again, when I applied, I was in California, but the people in my cohort, we had people from like New York, Chicago, Puerto Rico. There's people from all over the place, but yeah, it's a really great program. That one is around 8 to 10 weeks. And then again, you work with a faculty mentor, and the program itself, so like SROP will bring in speakers, and there's other opportunities for like professional development, which is really great, super beneficial. There's actually a number of different programs like that too across other universities. So if you all are interested in looking at those, you can always just type in the university like on Google, and then type in summer research program to see if they offer something like that. There's also M-Spiced, which is open to both University of Michigan and non-University of Michigan students. And then there is, so again, yeah, that's kind of like a similar research program, but a summer research program, but it's specifically focused on cognition and early development. And then there is SOAR as well, which I actually don't know too much about SOAR, Cindy. I know you
Yeah,
dropped the
so
link.
I can talk a little bit about that. So SOAR is a brand new program. It's for those of you who, if you're going to be a junior in the fall, you can apply to be part of SOAR, and it's part of a 2-year program for people who are interested in behavioral sciences research that is focused on HIV or AIDS. So basically, if you're interested in psychology, public health type research, that could be a really interesting program for some of you too. And we're going to have a list. We're going to give you guys a link to a Google Sheet later on that has basically a ton of different programs for you to look through as well.
Definitely. Yeah, that'll be the next slide right after this one. But as I was kind of talking about, there is nationwide opportunities as well that don't necessarily have to be linked to your university or the University of Michigan. So some of the places that you can, or I guess 2 really prominent sites where they offer a lot of research opportunities and kind of have things compiled already is through NSF. So if you go to the National Science Foundation website and type in like REUs, which is research experiences for undergraduates, it'll populate like a list of different programs that offer those. And then, yeah, it'll basically show you all the different universities that are offering those that NSF is aware of. And then another place you can find that at is through APA, which is the American Psychological Association. They also have lists of undergraduate research opportunities. Kind of all this to say that even if you're not able to find a research opportunity at your own institution, or if you're not interested in the research being done there, there's a lot of different avenues where you can seek out these experiences. And then I think in particular for people like, for people like Jessica, Lindsay, and I that come from schools that aren't necessarily research intensive, they're really cool opportunities to collaborate with other universities. And then when you're applying to graduate schools, if you don't come from a research intensive institution, it really shows that like, hey, even though I don't come from this institution, I can do work there. Like, look, I did this whole program, I got this experience. And then it's also a great way to kind of get that own experience yourself. Like it's a nice, I think it was like a really growing or developing experience for me. It was like, wow, I mean, I've never been at an institution like this that is so focused on research, and like all the faculty are working together, and there's all these students doing research. So it's really a great opportunity in a lot of different ways. Yeah, and then so we actually have this Google sheet. I'll drop in the chat. Whoops, that's not it. Let me pull it up. Cool. So if you go to this Google sheet, this will actually show you a lot of programs that you can check out. Yeah, and these are at the national level. We have some specific to Michigan, but yeah, a lot that would be applicable to anyone at whatever university you're at. So yeah, we definitely recommend checking those out. And I mean, they all have different kind of criteria for admittance. Some of them are offered at like different years in your college career, but yeah, really great resource there. So if you're interested in, well, I imagine you all are because you're here at this workshop, but yeah, definitely check those out to kind of get an idea of what's out there and what's being offered. There's a lot of programs and opportunities that people aren't always aware of. So it's definitely what we try to do is to make students aware of them. And then, yeah, as you all search through these, you can always share these resources with other students as well that are interested. Great, and I think, yeah, from there, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Lindsay, who will be explaining the practical steps in the process of applying to these positions.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so next we're going to talk a little bit about what the different steps are for actually applying to some of these research positions and some recommendations about how to go about each of those different steps of the process. So it may initially seem like this is sort of, oh, you apply and you're done, but there's actually about 4 steps that we recommend in this process, from initially defining your interests, your goals, what you're passionate about and what you're interested in pursuing, using those interests and goals to narrow down your options to figure out what's going to be the best fit for you and your goals in research positions to apply to. After that, there's the process of actually expressing interest in those positions to the lab or positions that you're interested in. And then the last step is actually applying, submitting the actual application to the positions. So we'll talk a little bit about each of those. So starting with defining your interests and goals. First off is, as you sort of saw from our experiences, no 2 paths are alike. So no 2 individuals have the exact same goals, interests, or the exact same path to pursuing those. And there may be changes in interests. No experience is a bad experience, in the sense sometimes what you learn from an experience is, didn't like that. Not for me, and that's still valuable information, even if our interests sort of shift and change over time. But what we really want to start looking at is, what is your ultimate goal? Where do you see for your future? Are you thinking graduate school? Are you thinking you might be interested in teaching, research, working with people, experimenting with animals, going with a more brain or biological approach? What are those goals that are sort of pushing you forward? That can be a lot to try to figure out in undergrad. I certainly wasn't there when I was in undergrad. So a way to get started on that, to start formulating what you might want to do, is asking yourself, what topics are interesting you? What classes are really standing out? Do you have any volunteer experience, work experience, clubs that are really sticking out as topics that interest you? And more broadly, what do you really like or dislike, as a way to lead you towards some of those initial interests? You can also think about what fits with your current goals. So thinking about, what are my current goals? A lot of the times there's a difference between whether our goals are really clear to us and there's sort of a clear path on what we need to do to get to them. And then oftentimes those goals are a little bit more unclear. Both of those are totally normal. I know people from undergrad who were like, this is my path, I know it from day one through the door. And there were people like me who were a couple years out of school, still kind of going, ooh, wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Now, what am I going to do with these experiences that I have? How am I going to pivot? So being at either place at any point is completely normal and part of that unique path. But there are some recommendations for how you can start working through this process of going from more unclear goals to clear goals. So unclear tends to look, and this may resonate with a lot of you, that I know I need to build skills. I know that I need to get experiences in different areas. I want to learn more about this field in general, so that I can figure out what I want to do, what my interests are. That's sort of the vibe of a more unclear goal. By comparison, this clear goal is really this idea of, I have 2 or 3 topics that I'm interested in. I'm interested in, the brain and working with children within this specific diagnosis or area of a field. I know that I need to apply to specific positions that are going to give me those experiences. I'm going to apply to things that are going to relate to those topics that I'm interested in so that I can get experience in those areas. I know that there are these core skills that I want to build, or just sort of building skills that are related to this topic, and those positions are going to get me there. And then through this, I'm going to have a mentoring experience with some people that are going to line me up to have letters of recommendation to work towards my ultimate goal, which is to pursue a PhD in developmental psych or whatever that sort of end goal is for you. So it's this very sort of step-by-step, what are the pieces that are going to get me to my larger ultimate goal in the long run. So again, everybody's at a different stage of this, but we're pushing towards wanting to get that more clear, defined goal, because that really helps with this really overwhelming process of what positions do I apply to know what those steps are that you're trying to work towards. So this slide has some resources that can be helpful in sort of thinking to yourself, reflecting on what interests or goals you have. So there are some helpful books for figuring out what kind of work really energizes you, defining your goals, things of that nature. I think Designing Your Life is one example of what that might look like. There's other online worksheets as well, like Energy Engagement, Failure Log, Good Time Journal, Odyssey Planning. All of these can be different resources, and you can use the link in the slides to get to those and sort of reflect a little bit on what your interests might be. So definitely seek out those resources if you're in that a little bit of the unclear sort of stage and wanting to push towards a more clear idea of what your goals are. The second step in this sort of 4-step process is narrowing our options down. So there's a lot of positions out there, even if it doesn't always feel like there are a lot. And having a good idea of our interests and goals really helps us narrow down what the fit is going to be for our specific goals and what we really want. So one of the ways we can do that of narrowing fit is looking at the details of the specific labs that we're interested in applying to. Do your interests align with the work that the lab's doing? Is there a primary mentor or supervisor that does work that you're really interested in? What are the primary duties of RAs in the lab? And are those going to fit with your goals for the skills you want to build and experiences you want to have? And what's the time commitment? What is the lab going to ask for you? Is it going to fit into your schedule? Is it going to be realistic for you? The second step in this process is thinking about the culture of the specific labs. So, who are the people serving in the lab right now, filling those positions? Are they former, current undergrads? Is there sort of the skills that you want developed in that culture? Are you going to be able to meet those requirements? Is there like a journaling club? What are the components of the culture in that lab? And is that going to be a good fit for you? And then the third component is mentorship. So thinking about opportunities to get specific mentoring, either from senior RAs or graduate students. What are those opportunities going to be to get that personal mentorship sort of relationship? And is that going to be met by the specific labs that you're thinking about applying to? The third step in this process is expressing interest. So who are we going to be contacting? There's a lot of people in a lab. So one of the sort of core mistakes that we see a lot with undergraduates applying to positions for the first time is they make that really natural jump to, I'm going to apply to a lab's primary advisor, the faculty member, the sort of senior person in the lab, first to try to talk to them. And Faculty members run sort of the broad overarching components of a research study, but often they're managing this very large team, sort of the overhead person above all of these individual teams or individual people who are really the best person who's making those sort of more specific decisions about projects that are going on. So for example, we have a picture here of Dr. Jill Becker's lab in biopsychology area, and there's an arrow pointing to Jill. And as you can see, her lab group is very large and made up of lab managers, grad students, postdocs, and undergraduate research assistants. So there's a lot of these different pieces to a lab. Lab managers are really those people who coordinate lab work. They're familiar with a lot of the different projects on a team. Graduate students are usually involved on various projects as well. They may need help on their specific projects that they're running for their dissertation or components of their schooling. Postdoctoral students are have an advanced research skill set. They are usually managing multiple projects. They often have more time to mentor students than the PI might on the team. And then there's the faculty principal investigator, who is that person who gets a lot of emails from students interested in all of these projects, but is really busy managing everybody on this team. So we really recommend, if you're reaching out to a lab to express interest, which is very much recommended to do if there's a lab that you're interested in, to contact the lab manager, graduate students, or postdocs who are going to be working in a more direct way on the projects that you're interested in. And if they're not the right person, they're going to have a really good idea of who to direct you to be able to get you to the right person, and have a much closer connection probably to you while you're working on the projects. You can find these people on lab web pages. So if you find the lab that you want, there's a link down here to the has all of the research labs laid out and websites for each of the labs. You can look up the page in the department, faculty, students. There's usually a member page where you can find all the individuals who are involved in projects to be able to contact them. All right, so after who to contact, we need to know what to say. So core things that we recommend for what to say is, first of all, be concise. Again, even the PIs get a lot of emails, grad students get a lot of emails, lab members get a lot of emails. So keeping this to a very concise 4 to 5 sentences of the core information that you want to communicate is going to make it a lot easier. Nobody wants to read that huge novel sort of presentation of an email when they've got a list of 50 emails to get through of interest in the lab. Express that you have knowledge of the work that's being done. So check out on that lab webpage recent publications, department personal pages, try to get a sense of what work's being done in the lab, and express interest in that work in particular to show that you know what they're doing, you know sort of what you're asking for in expressing interest. Be clear and direct, so avoid vague statements. It should be clear why you're sending the email within that 4 or 5 sentences, what you're that you're hoping to apply for a position in the lab, or you're interested in what positions might be available. And then tend towards a more formally written email. So when addressing the person in the email, make sure to use titles. If they're a graduate student, lab manager, it's going to be Mr. or Ms. If it's a postdoc or faculty, it's going to be Dr. And then avoid using casual language like slang in the messages. So short, concise, formal is the formula for these messages. And I've got a couple examples here that I'm going to read. So the first one, hello, Dr. Block. I'm a sophomore majoring in psychology with a minor in biological science. I read about your ACT lab, and I think the social desirability experiment on your website is very interesting. Are you currently accepting RAs? Please let me know the process involved with getting involved in your lab. I've attached my resume for your convenience. Thank you, your name. So this email is doing everything right. It's very brief, it's concise, it's clear what the student is asking, inquiring, and it's written in a very formal sort of way using appropriate titles. On the other hand, the second email is all the things not to do, essentially, in an email. So, hi, Sam. I've heard that it's good to get involved in research for anyone who might want to go to med school. I'm a sophomore and I found your lab through the psychology website. Can you tell me about your research? Do you think it's worthwhile lab for an undergraduate name? So this email is written very informally. It's asking the writer of the message to inform the student about the merits of the lab, whether this would be a good opportunity. So it's not really conveying that they know anything about the lab or that they've done their research on it. And it's not really clearly indicating that they're interested in a position with the lab or that they're interested in applying. It's more questioning in this sort of vague way that isn't as effective.
The other thing I do want to point out is that it's also not proofread. So there's errors all over the place, and we care a lot about that because if you're entering our data, we really need you to be accurate for that. So if you're not doing this for your initial letter, where we know you're trying to make an impression, that's an immediate trouble sign for us about, oops, are you going to be able to pay attention in the detail that we need for the data?
Yeah. And that message, the first one mentioned a resume or a CV. These are a great thing to provide with more information. If the person that you're emailing is interested in looking into that, they have the document available. Often the applications will require some form of CV or resume as well. At the undergraduate position level, usually a resume or a CV are completely fine to submit. So either one can work. Resumes are usually less than 2 pages, objective educational recognitions, and CVs tend to be sometimes a little bit longer, giving more brief descriptions of research or work positions. And you probably wouldn't have some of the components in the sense of peer-reviewed publications, conference presentations that tend to come a little bit farther along in research. Either way, you really want to highlight special contributions or leadership positions that you've had in the past on your resume or CV. And then lastly, there's the actual submission of the application, step 4. So after you've expressed interest, we move on to actually applying. A few application due tips when you're doing those applications. Again, use very clear, simple language. Ask yourself, would your friends understand this application if you gave it to them? Tailor the details of the experience to the job posting. So being really specific about what you're writing. That, for example, I worked on 2 projects with several students on these specific topics, rather than saying I've done research in the past. And talk about how your research interests align with the lab's research focus. That sort of essential question of why this lab? Why is this the right fit for you at this point? And then generally aligning again with what the lab's currently doing. Publications don't necessarily equal current work in the lab. So review the lab page listings, look up in the investigator, and think sort of broadly about what the lab has been working on recently, rather than focusing on sort of one specific publication that might have interested you. And then application don'ts. So we want to make sure, as some of these sort of core focuses, first, don't make the classic mistake of copy and pasting things over from another email into the same one with the exact same information without changing it. That can lead to a lot of mistakes of submitting the old professor's name on the new application, not changing details out that can be, they're definitely noticed by the person reviewing the application when that happens. So proofreading in general, as well, don't submit materials with typos in them. Make sure you're spelling names correctly. Don't bombard people with too many emails. Everybody's very busy, especially professors who receive hundreds of emails per day sometimes. So give some time, give some grace in responding, giving them the time to be able to respond to your message. Again, be specific, don't be vague. Like, I love working with humans, I love psychology. That's going to apply to pretty much every position that you could apply to. Don't propose learning what the lab isn't doing or that it's beyond qualification. So stick to what they're really doing and what you're interested in within the skills and experiences that you can gain from them. And then if it requires a cover letter, don't be too personal in the details that you disclose, such as I've suffered from depression and anxiety, which has made me very interested in the field of clinical psychology. So again, err on that side of being really formal and keeping it very sort of strict to the interests that brought you to the lab without some of that personal disclosure information. All right, and with that, I think I'm gonna turn it over to Jess.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So, yep, I'm going to cover our last main section for today. So, as Lindsay just gave us a great description about all of the steps leading up to applying, and Eric shared a lot of helpful information about the types of positions you might be applying for. And so now I'm going to wrap up with, in that application process, the main steps that you might encounter and how to just go about those final pieces to hopefully secure that position. So there are 5 main components of the application process that I'm going to review today. I think the overarching theme of all of these, what's something important to note is that, organization is going to be your best friend. So really knowing that these steps are coming and thinking about how you're going to prepare for them is going to be really helpful throughout this process. So thinking about the specific components, first, we'll talk about demographic questions, then we'll review some information about transcripts and a statement of interest. Finally, we'll talk about some tips for getting really good letters of reference, and finally, how to go about that final stage of interviewing. So first, talking about demographics, as Eric explained earlier, there are a number of different types of programs. And so some programs are going to be looking to recruit individuals with different demographic backgrounds or from different identities. They may be, educational, cultural, geographic. And so these are just a couple of different characteristics that certain programs might specifically be geared towards. So that's something to think about. There might be characteristics such as US citizens versus international students, applications for programs specifically emphasizing underrepresentation in the field. There might be programs specifically for transfer students, as well as for students who are younger in their training, so maybe a first or second year. And then also individuals who are specifically on that path hoping to pursue graduate school. Secondly, another common part is a transcript. So many programs will ask you to submit a transcript. If you're a student here at Michigan, as you can see, those are actually easily accessible via Wolverine Access, which is great. So you have access to electronic PDFs, both official and unofficial, and you can request hard copies from the school as well. And most schools will have some method of requesting transcripts. It just often you need to talk to the registrar or someone to get that information. And a little bit more about transcripts. One quick point I wanted to make too is kind of what the purpose of them are. So they can tell the person that you're applying for about, how you've been doing in your classes. So it gives them a sense of your grades, of course. But also it provides information about what classes you've taken. So, some labs or research programs might be specific to a certain area. And if you've taken classes that relate to that topic, that could be really helpful for them to know. And thinking about your grades and your courses, some programs will have a minimum expectation for GPA. So as you know, it's always a good idea to just try and keep your grades up as much as you can to try and be as competitive as possible for these types of programs. Next is the statement of interest. So this ties into, honestly, the messages that Lindsay was talking about earlier. A lot of these ideas are relevant when you're writing out either a personal statement or just questions they might ask about your interest in the lab. So, some similar advice here. It's a good idea not to be vague. So you want to make sure that you express specifically why you're interested and excited in this position. As Lindsay was explaining, it's great to look at their website to know what's currently going on in the lab. And it really boosts your application because it shows you've done your homework and your research. Next, related to the transcript, as I was talking about kind of qualifications, that's something you really want to emphasize. So, if you're someone who's applying to their first RA position, we're not going to expect you to have research skills specifically, but you probably have a lot of other transferable skills that you may have derived in or developed in a lot of other settings. So these could be, things like writing or working with others. There might be technical skills you do have with Microsoft Office, working with like Qualtrics or databases, quantitative software. So highlighting that is always important. Next, not being overly altruistic. So this has to do with career goals. Often career goals are something that they're going to want to know about. And it's important to explain how the program or the position that you're applying for aligns with those goals. But with that being said, it's also not a good idea to be overly extreme in what those aspirations are to try and boost your chances of candidacy. So, saying that you're destined to help all people or that you're going to change the world is a little bit over the top. So we do want you to be clear about how this specific research will fit into your larger career goals, and just to be a little more specific, because everyone would love to, make an impact on the world, but people want to know, how are you specifically excited about this research, and, how will that passion shine through in your qualifications? Next, you definitely want to emphasize your written communication skills. So as we were talking with the messages, make sure that you are demonstrating your ability to be methodical and meticulous with your work and have materials that you've proofread. And if you have, trusted family members, friends, people in your life who can read over statements, that can also be really helpful just to make sure you didn't miss anything. And then I think there are two last points here, Cindy, if you don't mind going one more bullet. Great. So thank you. So with these two, they kind of go together. So the idea is, in an application, sometimes there might be a gap or a feeling that you don't have as much experience as other applicants, maybe, based upon any sorts of just lack of exposure to whatever you might be interested in and getting into it for the first time. And so we wouldn't recommend that you excuse those gaps or current lack of skills by saying, I don't have much experience. It would more so be, it would be more appropriate to contextualize it by explaining, based upon my background, I wasn't familiar with these things, but I did X, Y, and Z in order to learn more and to pursue my goals. And so we really think here, you really have the opportunity to express how your motivation to seek out these resources and to, overcome these challenges that you may have experienced really fits with your commitment to getting the research position and showing those skills in their lab as well. Awesome. So the next section pertains to letters of reference. So as you know, this kind of comes through a long history of developing a mentoring relationship with someone. And when it finally comes to applying for something, you want to ask someone who is not related to you, preferably, someone who you've worked with in the past. It could be a former instructor, a supervisor. And the real goals of the letters of reference are to demonstrate your social skills, your maturity, also your ability to work independently and to be motivated. And so what we want to highlight here is that with all of these skills, the purpose of the letter of recommendation is to show how you work rather than how you are in class. So that if this is an instructor, right, it's more important that they're talking about how you demonstrated critical thinking skills, you differentiated yourself in your work versus, that you attended class and met baseline expectations just for being a student. And that would be, the only context in which they knew you. And lastly comes the interview. So the interview is normally the last component, and the purpose is really for you and whoever you're meeting with, whether it be a lab manager, a grad student, for you to get a sense of each other and kind of for them to know who you are. So, and then on the other side of things, it's also an opportunity for you to learn about the lab, what the expectations might be, and also to get your questions answered too. So the first recommendation is just to make sure to practice. So that's the best way to be prepared, right? And so you might even consider recording yourself to listen back to practicing your answers. And there are a number of questions that are almost always going to come up. So that's really helpful with prepping. Basically, you're always going to get the question, why did you apply for this position? Why are you interested in our lab? What are your career goals? And those are the sorts of things that you can definitely prepare ahead of time. And then additionally, it's also really good to prepare some questions ahead of time. So at the end of the interview, you're almost always going to get the question, do you have any questions for me? You want to make sure that you do, just because that's going to demonstrate that you're thoughtful, that you're conscientious, and that you are genuinely interested, that you care to get more information, and that you have those critical thinking skills and that engagement with them too. Next, we talked a little bit about this already, but sometimes you'll get a question about weaknesses or gaps in your qualifications or your resume. And so that's also something that's smart to prepare for or plan for. And something that we recommend is really to consider how you can spin those weaknesses into an opportunity as to how you, thought of ways to address those challenges. And so, for example, say you have a lot on your plate or you had struggled with time management, expressing how you're using a planner, you have these other organization tools to maintain that time management, and that you're really an active participant in making yourself as qualified and capable as possible. And then it's also always important to follow up with a short thank you email. I know we said people get a lot of emails, but these do go a long way. It's really important still. Even if they don't respond to it, it's always a very good idea to send a thank you email, just because, we're going to follow the same dues as before that Lindsay reviewed. So you're going to be concise, restate your interest and your excitement for the project or the position. And of course, make sure that you're proofreading, that you're using your formal titles to address the individual that you met. Or, if they told you to call them something more informal, that might be a stage where you could actually make that modification, but that would be upon, getting that kind of permission from the person you spoke with. Great. So we kind of went over all the steps of actually applying. So now we're going to talk specifically at Michigan about how you create a profile on the research opportunity tool. So there are several screenshots on this slide of basically this research profile tool that you can access to submit a research profile. There's a link to where this portal can be found in the presentation. I can also drop it in the chat for everyone as well. And so that's the page that's going to link you to this research profile. And there's actually also a video on that page that reviews this process of making the research profile. So you can go ahead and check that out. But as you can see here, it's going to cover a lot of the things that we already reviewed. So it'll ask you to describe your interests, put in some information about yourself and where you are in your training, and then also some stuff about career plans and other general information. So that's really the first step. And then if we move to the next slide, this is very similar to what Eric was showing before, but it's specific. So it basically is a whole set of research listings. And so when you click on these different postings, it'll actually give you all sorts of information about the project description, what student qualifications people are looking for, the time commitment required, if there's, opportunities for a course credit or a thesis. There's a lot of information in these postings. And so you can also access this listing right where that research profile link is as well. And one key point just to end on here is that you do need to have a research profile in order to complete the application for a specific listing. So you want to do that research profile first. And then once you find a listing, if you go about it that way, there's sometimes a couple additional questions that a specific lab would have for you relating to their specific post, and you can go ahead and fill those out afterwards.
Okay, so now, so I'm Dr. Lustig. I'm the faculty director who works for STAR, and I'm also the lead for undergraduate studies here. So if any of you who are Michigan students have questions about this, you can definitely come to our SAA office, and we're happy to help you out. So now we're going to get into some additional aspects of looking for research that might be useful to know. And one of the things that I do want to address is that especially going into winter semester, it can be tough to find research positions. And I think a lot of labs, including mine, are still, sort of recovering a little bit from the pandemic and not running with as many people as we were before. So one thing is that you can lay the groundwork even before you apply for positions to sort of boost your resume and your candidacy. And there are just so many free resources available on the internet. So some of the things that we really need in the labs, if you take a look at last time's presentation, we actually went through and talked about the specific skills that different labs in different areas are in. So again, if you haven't watched our last session, I really encourage you to review that. But there's websites like Coursera, there's Stats Thinking 21 that offers resources on the programming language R, which is going to be hugely helpful for you across a lot of different areas. Python for Everybody is a website that offers courses and materials for learning Python, which is a really popular programming language. There's some really good stats YouTube channels that are free for you to access. So one is called 3 Blue, 1 Brown. StatsQuest is also really good. The other ones that can be helpful are things like Zotero, Mendeley, EndNote. So there's a lot of different ones. So again, really, I encourage you to use the STAR workshop, how to get involved in research and what to do if you can't find a position this year, excuse me, to help you find it. And again, as I think it was Lindsay was saying, think about the skills that you use in your classes. Most of you are going to write some kind of a paper for many of the classes that you're taking, and you're going to have to use citations. So get familiar with the citation managers there, because very often the first project that you might do in a lab is just doing a literature research project, because we often like to have people do that as the first thing in the lab, both because it's something that we need to have done, and also it helps to get you familiar with and excited about the kind of work that's going on in the field and in the lab. Data management and basic coding resources, as I was saying, Excel, any kind of stats sort of thing. These are some of the most popular ones. I personally really like JASP for beginners in particular, because it's super easy to learn. It's a lot less complicated than SPSS or some of the others to review. And there are just a ton of sort of short, friendly videos to help you get used to it. And again, here's some of these others. The other thing to do is for researchers, particularly if you're looking for a summer position or for a long-term position that is not in your university. If you have an interest in a particular area, use academic Twitter. So first of all, take a look at the researchers that you're interested in and look to see if they have a Twitter page and start following them. Right now, I know Twitter is a mess, and so some people are jumping off, but I would say so far, there's still, most people seem to be staying on and using it as a resource. The others is that you can also take a look. There's a couple channels. So like Academic Chatter is one that a lot of people post to, and they will often post position openings there. PhD Chat is another one. So I would say ask your GSIs, because probably your GSIs are pretty familiar with these as well, and see if they have any recommendations for you. Twitter really is great because, as I said, you can use it to learn about new researchers. Again, younger researchers who are the ones who are first starting up their labs and who thus have the most openings for research assistants are also way more likely than some of us older folks to have a Twitter. and they're probably more fun to work with too, I'll be honest. And so you want to go ahead and take a look at that. It's also a low stakes opportunity to network. Just, if you're going to use social media as a professional network, then remember to be professional on it. There are some people who don't necessarily always follow that rule, but probably if you're at the beginning stage, it's going to be a good rule of thumb to follow. So this is an example. So this was put together by one of our former STAR mentors last year, who actually got his postdoctoral position pretty much by starting to connect with the people whose lab he ended up through Twitter. But these are just different people that he's following. And again, this is showing, attention perspective psych PhD programs, if you're interested in this, research position. And so, these were things that he found just literally, in the course of a couple of days. So again, there's a ton of these available. All right, and so with that, we're pretty much at the end of the materials that we have to present. So do you guys have any questions or comments that you'd like to raise? All right, I'm not seeing any. So again, if you're interested in the research but not sure about the topic, it's very common. Don't panic. Reflect on your coursework, your extracurricular experiences, and even just, your daily life. So, Eric gave a great example of how the skills that he learned at Wells Fargo helped him a lot on his journey and the connections that he made there. I had, a similar experience my first summer of undergrad. I spent being an office temp, and the skills that I learned in Microsoft Office and Excel, like I'm still literally teaching the undergrads in my lab those right now for data organization. So, become a wizard in those things, and don't overlook the skills that you might already have. Look through some listings and some lab websites, see what jumps out at you. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to look at research outside of your department or even outside of your institution. One thing that I often tell people is that psychology, because we do teach so many undergraduates, almost all of us, I can say I get 3 or 4 emails a week asking me for a research position. So, the competition there is pretty tough, but there's a lot of places that do research that's related to psychology. So next week, I'm actually going to be meeting with a new professor who's technically over in kinesiology, but she's doing work very similar to the work that's being done in my lab. Psychiatry is a great place to look because they don't get a lot of exposure to undergraduates, but they're doing really cool and interesting work on a lot of different disorders, and even on normal development. And so, the School of Business, especially if you're interested in more sort of social topics and information, School of Information. So look broadly if you're not able to find a spot specifically in psychology. If you're doing research for credit, just check the department rules. In most cases, if you want to do research credit within the psych or BCN major, but it is with a mentor who is outside of the psychology department, we can arrange that. Usually we just have sort of a nominal mentor within psychology who maybe knows the person that you're working with outside of the department a little bit, or they at least sort of draw up a mentorship agreement. So most faculty members are pretty accommodating for this. When's a good time to start your research experience? It's never too early, but it's also never too late. So, you may have noticed I dropped into the chat earlier on. One of our STAR scholars from last year is somebody who's actually a mom. I think she's closer to my age, who's got her kids sent off to college, and she is now in a research lab. She's going to be starting her second year next year. She's going to be doing a master's with the hope of applying to a PhD program. And she's doing great and she's loving it. It's possible to continue research after graduation. And in fact, that's becoming more and more popular. I would say I'm looking at graduate student applications right now, And most of the people who, especially those who are on the top of the list, they actually have taken some time off after undergraduate, built their skills, and really thought a little bit about what it is that they want to do. And because of that, they're coming into it with a stronger idea of their direction, and that really shines through on their application. So even if you haven't had a chance to do it, I know a lot of people might be transfer students, they may not have had the chances to get involved early. It's okay. It might mean that you spend a little bit more time after undergrad, but it does not cut you off from it. It's your passion and commitment that matters. And I would say it is both of those. So passion, and then the direction of that passion into commitment that you demonstrate by the activities that you do. And what you can get from doing research, even if you don't stay in academia, you can get a lot of different skills. So if you go into research, it does not mean that you're necessarily going to become a professor. I personally like being a professor. It works for me, but it's not for everybody, and that's perfectly fine. Actually, one of the companies that hires the most of our graduate students is actually Facebook. I have graduate students that work at Amazon. I have one of them that runs an educational program. I have for high schools in North Carolina. I know people who've gone on to do animal training because that's what they learned during their program. So you can really do a lot of different stuff. And again, if you're kind of interested in what kind of careers you can get after getting your research experience in psychology, then check out our next session in December, because we're actually going to have a number of people who have not become professors, but who've gotten their degrees in psych. So your skills are transferable. And then all you need to do is, just like you sort of think about your outside skills for applying for a lab in psychology, you also think in reverse then about the skills that you learned in the psychology lab and how those apply to other positions. And so just remember, no paths are alike. And if it's easy, everybody would do it. So, just by taking the first step and spending some time on a beautiful summer evening in November, you're already showing that you have some of that passion and commitment. So, give yourself credit for that. So thank you for joining us, and please feel free to contact us with any questions or feedback.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Cool.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
And
to see
Eric,
all
I
of
saw
you.
you laughing. Oh, sorry.